Hello, my fellow Alaskans. How are you all doing out there today? We are live here in my Adobe with Bruce Walden, who is running for Alaska, governor for Alaska. Hopefully he's wanting to unseat Governor Dunleavy from his position that he currently is sitting in and become the new governor of Alaska. And we are here to learn everything we can from him here today and make sure that we get ourselves well educated before this election begins. And so I'm going to take a moment here and I'm going to bring Bruce Walden onto the screen and introduce him here. This is Bruce Walden with Governor for Alaska. Tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're running, and what brought you to want to become the next governor of our state.
Sure, absolutely. 4 years ago, when Governor Walker was in office, I was looking at the things that he had done to the state, and I say done to the state, and I mean it just that way. And I was on my way to work. I remember exactly where I was, and I prayed about it, and I said, God, if somebody doesn't jump into this race, I'm going to have to, because we've got to put somebody up against this guy. And again, it's about the same stretch of road I'm riding down. I think it's Rick Rydell who mentioned that Mike Dunleavy is going to run. Now, I've known Mike for a while. We're not fishing buddies or anything, but we've known each other, and I was on the planning commission. In fact, I was the deputy chairman for Wasilla, for the borough, but I was representing Wasilla. And but that was back when the current governor, was on the school board. So it's, we kind of started about the same level of government, and I've never been in elected office, but that's where I was as appointed. And when Rick Rydell mentioned that, I shouted hallelujah, because I'm off the hook, and just went on about my business. And the governor was elected, and we were all happy. And almost immediately he started backing away from everything. And when they tried to do the recall on him, it seemed like he just curled up in a ball and hasn't done anything since. Well, last year I started a little newspaper. It's called the Alaska Times, and it's on hold right now because I'm running for office. And if I'm going to produce a newspaper, of course it's going to say that I'm Superman, So it's kind of on hold for right now. We'll see how things go. But and if elected, or when elected, I'll probably hand that over to an individual who is one of my chief reporters and let them run it. But when I interviewed the governor during the time that newspaper was up and running last year, I kept hearing everything was somebody else's fault from the governor. And about halfway through that interview, I said, I can do a better job than this guy. And that's when I decided to throw my hat in the ring. And I did. Last year, I declared publicly down in Soldotna. It was a little shindig down there, and I declared publicly, and we have just been forging ahead ever since, yeah.
All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the conversation here. There's one question that I love asking all Alaskans, especially the ones that are currently running for office. What is your feelings towards the Constitutional Convention? Should we have it? If so, why? Should we not have it? If so, why? And then expect to defend your position depending on what you have to say.
Absolutely. I have been an advocate of the Constitutional Convention for years and years and years. There's so many things that we need to change now. That the founders of our state, they put a constitution together, was probably good for its time. But that was back when we had a couple of 100,000 people living in the state. Well, we're crowding, or we're over 700,000 now, supposedly. And the world has changed. And constitutions are not to be taken lightly. Like the US Constitution, you hear Joe Biden up there blithering whenever he can finally get a sentence together, and he says things like, well, it's not set in stone. Well, yeah, it kind of is. It's made to be difficult to change. But as time goes along, the Alaska Constitution seems to apply to our lives less and less, as it should. There are some things that need to be changed. The way we appoint judges, the way we take judges out of office. I've always been an advocate of us having sheriffs here.
Are you for term limits?
I am absolutely 100% for term limits, not just here, but in the U.S. Capitol as well. Because here's the thing. If it's good enough for a president, it should be good enough for everybody else. The problem we have here in Alaska, well, it's the same way across the country, but I live here, is we get somebody that get in office and they continue to be reelected because of name recognition. That's something I'm fighting right now, because I was the first Republican certified in this race. And I still am running into people saying, I've never heard of you. And the powers that be, Once you're an incumbent, boy, you can control things. It's got to stop. We need to get brand new ideas in. We've got the same old rehashed ideas coming out of people over and over and over. And then we have the dynasties that we have. Well, so-and-so is so-and-so's son or so-and-so's daughter. So we elect them out of name recognition. We've just got to kind of step back and take another look at the way we do business up here. We've got to change our minds. We've got to change the way we think about things. We've got to change the way we do business. And I think it's going to start with a state constitutional convention. So vote yes on that this November.
Well, we hear from the political sides out there, the alternate teams that are against this, and they're throwing out things like they're going to completely abolish abortion and make it illegal in the state of Alaska, which we've had in our Constitution since we became statehood. They claim that they're going to completely destroy our gun rights, take our Second Amendment away, and come after all of our guns, which is a part of our statehood Constitution. These are just kind of the straw man arguments that are going out there. Do you think that going into this, that those kind of arguments or those kind of debates are even going to make their way through into the final version of the Constitutional Convention, the new Constitution they write up? And if it did, do you think Alaskans would really vote for it?
What I think will happen, and I believe this will answer the question, is if the people will get off of their rear end and walk down and say, I want to be a delegate to this convention, and show up in the right numbers, the right people showing up with the right numbers, with the right attitude and the right ideas, that won't happen. What you can't do, and I'm speaking directly to all of you Alaskans out there, and see now the people that are in government, they're not going to be part of this. It'll be just folks like I am right now. I'm just a citizen. I'm not in government. It's going to take people, citizens, stepping up and saying, no, we will not have that in this new, or this, that's not going to be part of this convention. So the things that you want in there, make sure that you get there and make sure that they're there. And the things you don't want in there, make sure that happens too. But I can tell you this, Alaskans aren't giving up their guns. I can tell you that. And Joe Biden, if you ever see this broadcast, don't bother, buddy, because you ain't getting our guns.
In our current election cycle, we've got several X's running in this current election, and by X's, I say either ex-senators or ex-governors. One of the most prominent that we have out there is Les Guerra, that is currently running, and he is one of the ones that helped bring our state into the fiscal financial disaster that it is currently in. And then we've got our ex-governor Walker, who vetoed the very first permanent fund dividend, and because of his actions, our Alaska law-breaking legislators currently right now exercise their will to be above the law and dictate the statutory PFD that goes to each and every Alaskan. The big question on everyone's mind is are you a lawmaker or are you a lawbreaker? And I state it that way because we have two different conflicting laws when it comes to our permanent fund dividend right now that is there. We got our statutory PFD law that says that Alaskans get first call based upon a formula, and for the last 7 years in a row, we have yet to see that actually happen. We came close last year, but the vote failed towards the end and it got stripped back out. And now we also have SB 26, the POMV law that they have, says they're allowed to take 5% of the earnings reserve account, and then they use what they want for government, and if and only if there is anything left there, that is what they distribute to us Alaskans now as a permanent fund dividend. It's hard to say that permanent part in front of SB 26's POMV law because there's nothing permanent written in that. So where do you stand with the permanent fund dividend? If there was a budget that was given to you without a statutory PFD, would you veto the entire budget? And if they don't follow the laws that we currently have on the books, and I'll bring one more into it that's 20 years old, the longevity bonus that went to our seniors was stripped away a little over 20 years ago. The law is still there to pay that bonus out. The way our legislators got around not having to repeal the law was they just defunded it, which kind of brings the final version of the other half of that question. Our state capital, our legislators have been voted to move our capital to the road system. And it has passed affirmatively twice, and they have gotten around following the laws that we Alaskans put before them, but just not funding it. So I know I packed that full of loaded questions there. Try to, if you get lost on any part of it, just re-ask me and I'll break it down, but it's all yours.
Right. Everything that you asked me is very relevant. So if I miss something, please help me to remember it, because I want to touch on everything that you just touched on. So let's talk about the PFD for a minute. There sits right now, the last time I looked, I haven't looked in a couple of months, but over 85 billion, I think, sitting in the permanent fund. And about, if they
77 billion.
Oh, it's down to 77 billion.
It due to the market and the money that came in, we lost $5 billion over this past year.
Oh, how smooth! So now look at this. They owe you. It doesn't matter. Here's the thing. When J.S. Hammond was governor, that's when the whole thing started. They got the permanent fund up and running, or the PFD up and running. It doesn't matter whether I owe you a penny or I owe you $1,000. I still owe you the money. And it doesn't matter how that owing of the money came about. If it's a promise made, it has got to be a promise kept. So what the first thing that needs to happen is we've got to get our state spending under control. It's ridiculous. 10% of Alaska's citizens either work for the federal government, the state government, borough, or city government. And that's a phony economy. That's not even real. We've got too many people working for the state government. Way too many. You look at the departments that work directly under the governor, and shoot, I lost count. It's about halfway through it, and I said, this is too much to digest right now. And then in each one of those departments, you've got a slew of people. And so often, the stuff that's done at the state level is it's duplicated at the borough and then at the local level. And a lot of the stuff that's being done by under the governor is a duplication of something being done by the federal government. It's ridiculous, people. And there comes a time, it's like I always say, you take a bucket and you turn it upside down, everything falls out, and you can wish, you can cry, you can throw yourself on the floor and throw a tantrum, but there's nothing in the bucket. And when the bucket's empty, it's empty. Now, here's the other thing. You were promised a PFD, and there is a traditional formula for that. Following that formula and going all the way back to when Bill Walker allowed it to be stolen from you, you're, in my estimation, the low ball, about $13,000 is owed to everybody in this state that is a citizen and was a citizen at that time. Of course, new people have come on board since then, so it wouldn't be as much. But I ask you, and I always ask this example, if I walk up to this gentleman sitting next to me here and I robbed him of $1,000, stuck a gun in his back, took $1,000, and they caught me and took me in front of a judge, and the judge says, Mr. Walden, give this man back his money.
Well, being in Alaska, you stuck a gun to my back, I'll guarantee you I'd be probably pulling out my own and sticking it towards your direction.
Well, see, I got the drop on you. But the idea being, if I stole $1,000 from you and the judge told me to pay it back, and I said, Your Honor, I've only got $100 to give to him, I need the rest. How long do you reckon that would... Do you suppose that would be allowed to stand? I'm pretty sure the judge wouldn't be that understanding. But that's precisely what the state's doing to you. They've stolen $13,000 at the very least from all of us who were eligible, and now they're giving us a pittance. $3,200. That's not that much these days, folks. That's not that much. That's like a payday and a half.
So a recent governorial debate, or I should say forum, because it was not a debate, but it was just you folks getting to talk to everybody.
Right.
And we had Kirka came out and he said that any budget that does not follow the laws that we currently have on the books, he will veto every single line item in the budget and send it back to them to do over again. Do you stand behind doing something like that, or where will your feelings be towards that type of a declaration, considering we just named off 3 laws that we currently don't follow in our state of Alaska? I'll bring 2 more in a little bit later on, but those are the main ones for the subject for the PFD here right now.
Right. I think I would have to kind of go along with that. It would depend on a few things. I mean, if there's something that I think, and I'd even say, look, we can deal with the rest of this. I'll line through this, but I would line through it. We don't see a lot of that out of the governor right now, where he lines through something that he thinks is wrong. But if they, too often they do just like he was saying, they'll throw a bunch of stuff in there to where you have a great big bill that maybe 50% of it is relevant and the rest of it's a bunch of garbage. I just tried to say, guys, you're going to have to do a little bit better work than this. Here a few years ago, we had such things in the bills being pushed forward as such as let's make the 30-06 the official rifle of the state when they had 90 days to get something done. Or let's have Alaska Marmot Day, and they had 90 days while our economy is circling the drain. And here's the problem. People say, oh, we're running out of time, so we better just pass this. No, go back and do the work. Go back and do the work, which brings me up to the next point, the state capital move. Actually, I was thinking it was 3 times. I thought it was twice they voted to move it to Willow, and then once to Wasilla. And we all voted to move the thing. But if any of you have seen the article that I wrote in the Alaska Times about the capital move, I believe back in the first time we voted to move the capital to Willow, I believe they were saying then, wasn't it like $4.5 billion they were saying it was going to cost? That was back in the late 70s.
Yeah. My parents were all excited when that had passed. I remember traveling, and then back as a kid, it was one of those, you classified it as an all-day event to get out to Willow and get back again. We packed up the back of our Bronco that we owned back then with our sleeping bags and our Mad Libs and got ready for the long journey out there and bought property, all excited about the capital moving out there and being able to live right next to it.
Right.
And then it went down the drain, and so did all of us Alaskans that invested our money out in that area because of the announcement. Found ourselves in a losing proposition in a city that wasn't going to grow as quickly as it could have.
So in this article, I looked at that and said, I went back to the old Benjamin Franklin's thinking, you take care of your pennies, the dollars take care of themselves. And I said, let's look at this. Let's look at this realistically. And I don't think anybody really did this that much. I looked at the typical cost of construction in 2016, I wrote that book. I wrote a book about this. But I wrote that article just last year. And I sat down and took pencil, paper, and calculator. And I started looking at, okay, the typical price of construction times 7 on the average. Because you build a state capitol, you want it to look nice. You want it to be impressive, of course. You don't want junk. We could build one out of storage containers. But we want people to come there and just think that they've seen something. And we want it to be functional. And I looked at the size of the state capitol building, that joke we got down there in Juneau right now, and it's, I think, 170,000 square feet. Some really big, there's a lot of floor space there. And you look at the governor's mansion, it's about 14,000 square feet, I think. Pretty big building. But if you look at all the buildings that are necessary, plus a 3-story building with 2,500 square foot apartments in it for the people that are visiting off the road system. Say you have a place to live here, you don't get per diem. You have a home here, everything's taken care of. You're here for 90 days, this is where you live. If you want to live out of here, you rent, you pay for that out of your pocket. But if we did all of these things, if you look at that article, you'll find that when I wrote that, and that's before this ridiculous inflation we're seeing right now, if you look at that, back then it was $700 million, and that's including $1 million per legislator to move their junk up here. And that's building a capital from the ground up, not taking another city. Yeah,
back in the 70s when they first passed this, that would have been the opportunity right then and there. And we were starting to see those big oil returns starting to come through from Prudhoe Bay at that point. Which also makes a good point. I mean, that was when the seed egg for the permanent fund dividend was started, during that same period of time when we voted to move the capital.
Right.
More in line, though, do you think it would be a smart idea, and I see a lot of advocates, I am definitely one of them out there that is promoting this, that we just leave the capital right where it's at. The capital can stay in Juneau. They can have the capital, but bring the legislative sessions onto the road system. We don't care where our capital is in our state. People want to go and see Juneau. Here's a reason to go to Juneau. The capital of Alaska is here. But bring the legislation to the road system where everyday Alaskans can come up and knock on the door of the governor, knock on the door of our legislators and say, hey, I have a concern. I'd like to talk to you face to face, not a 3-minute timed
Yep.
response that you're allowed to give during their committee meetings, where the special interests and lobbyists have gotten hours and days, if not weeks, down directly in front of them saying why they need to give the money to them.
Right. Well, the moving of the legislative session here to the road system has got to happen, if nothing else. Now, here's one of the problems with just doing that, because I talked to Governor Dunleavy about that last year, and I said, why do you not tell them, say, look, we're having this legislative session, we're going to move it to Wasilla? And he said that they'd just gavel in and gavel out and go home. And I said, okay, well, when they do that, then you let them go back and let them get comfortable. And you say, okay, next week it's going to be in Fairbanks, and then Utqiagvik, and then Wainwright and Nome, and just keep making it more and more uncomfortable for them until they do the will of the people. And I can live in a tent and eat MREs. That's my happy place. That don't bother me a bit. I'm a soldier. I suspect that there are a lot of people in our capital, in our legislature, that would probably have a problem with that. So eventually somebody's going to blink. There's the problem with just moving the legislative session, but that's a good first step. We need to do that, and we need to make them understand we're not going to settle for what we've been getting out of them anymore. But eventually, I would love to see the whole shebang moved.
Well, we've gone through three basic questions here. We've covered the Constitutional Convention. We've got your views and feelings towards the permanent fund dividend. One thing I did not get clear there, though, are you for, if you are as governor and you present your proposed budget at the beginning of January, the first few days they go into session, is your proposed budget going to have a statutory PFD in it?
Absolutely.
Or are you going to be like Governor Dunleavy and, as the years go by, waffle to the special interests and compromise in his fourth year that we're currently in, come out and start his proposal at 50-50?
Yeah, the statutory formula, that will be part of my budget from day one, and I won't back down on it. I won't. And here's the reason why, folks. A promise made has got to be a promise kept. And if your government is not keeping the promises that they made to you, let me take this back, and I'll try to keep this brief. When I joined the Army back in '79, I raised my hand for God and country. I went, and the promises were made to me that if you stay in for a full 20 years, you'll have full medical and full dental till you die. As soon as I retired, they started going back on the word. I was like, wait a minute, I kept my end of this bargain. You're not keeping your end of the bargain. And the defense was, well, did you have it written in paper? Well, no, none of us did. It was a promise. Where I come from, a promise, you shake a man's hand, you make him a promise, your word is your bond. We cannot expect that out of our government, maybe not the governor, the way it is right now. But I can guarantee you this one thing, I'll never compromise on that. Even if it means that after you get what's coming to you, there's only $60 billion left. Only $60 billion left in the permanent fund? Only?
Yeah, that's still, at this current point in time, 7 years ahead of their 10-year projection that they had before the big boom of the $20+ billion that rolled in over the last couple of years. Right. And but even right now, if they were to pay back every penny that they owe us here Alaskans that they've stolen over the last 7 years, it would still be $67 billion sitting inside of that permanent fund, which is $7 billion ahead of their 20-year projection, where they planned on being at within maybe 10 to 20 years.
Right.
And this was just prior to, we're talking like 2016, just before Trump took office, and our economy really began to change for the positive. All right, so we've got, that was the one thing I know I didn't make sure we covered on for the permanent fund dividend. I thank you for answering and help clarifying a little bit more detail there. The moving of the legislative body versus the capital being moved, or doing them both, and the votes that were there. Now that I consider we've gotten most of the fluff issues out of the way, other than the permanent fund dividend, which is always a very big, contentious, hot button out there. Time to get into the nitty and gritty of what is going on down there in Juneau. This past year, we had the highest budget ever recorded in Alaska's history, and that's after removing the permanent fund dividend out of it, compared to all the years prior that had the dividend still included. It was still the highest budget ever passed in Alaska's history. When you add in the local spending and the federal spending, it started out at $18 billion that they passed on a state level. a little over 18 billion, almost 19 billion dollars, minus the stolen portions of our PFD already out of that. And then you had another 10 billion, almost 11 billion dollars pass through our local government and federal government through, let's say, COVID relief funds, what the local spending is. I mean, just Anchorage alone spent another additional $300+ million added into the education system on top of what the state and federal government had already given them, and $500 million to spend over this year and next year of COVID relief money on top of that. So when you see the $29 billion that I'm saying, it's very realistic. These numbers have been hard broken down, made sure that I was very accurate on about the amount of money that was being spent. We had a $4.5 billion surplus this last budget, and I spoiled out all of that to get to this point. And that $4.5 billion was above and beyond what the current budget the governor had proposed at the beginning of January for this current year. They managed to spend every penny of that surplus. They forward funded K through 12 education illegally, binding the next legislative body to money that they spent, that by our own constitution and our own state laws says they can't do that. And now the kicker to it all is the budget, the $4.8 billion budget that was proposed by the governor, has been raised $300 million permanently when they passed the final budget. So instead of $4.8 billion this coming up fiscal year in 2023, it's going to be $5.1 billion that you as governor are going to have to write a budget to pay for. Oil prices, we know through history, has dropped. They don't stay steady. They will be from feast to famine. And during the feast, it was if like any good conservative, smart Alaskan, their family, they sit down at the dinner table, as Joe Biden likes to say all the time, discussing the issues that affect them. And they look at that money surplus that is rolling in the door, and they say, how can they invest it to make more money for them, not how do I spend it and not leave a dime for the next year when things may not be going as well as they are right now. Our government, on the other hand, has made it clear that they don't care how much extra money's there, they spend it. So we got that $300 million increase, $5.1 billion from $4.8 billion. What in your proposed budgets, or where do you stand at when it comes to those items? And I guarantee you we're going to touch upon the other big goose eggs out there, that is our education and our healthcare. So just kind of focus more on that increase that's there right now. And we got a constitutional budget reserve that has the sweep. And I'm bringing this up for a question that I know that a person that's watching right now is probably feverishly typing it up right now and going, oh good, he covered it, hit and delete. But we've got the sweep and the reverse sweep. Power cost equalization used to be a part of it before our Supreme Court decided that they were our legislative body and wrote their own laws on that. And then we've got other items, the education fund for scholarships and stuff like that all comes into that sweep. If they took that $4.5 billion and stuck it into that account, there would be about $6 billion in the constitutional budget reserve right now. Roughly about $4 billion, maybe $8 billion, depends on which numbers you go by. I like to stick to the $10 billion. And as long as you have $10 billion sitting inside of that account, the sweep does not happen. A governor used to come out with a number that said 14 billion is when he started his campaigning. If that money is there, the sweep doesn't happen. There's no reverse sweep required. There's no vote to reverse it back to where it belongs. Excuse me. So we got that money, that $4.5 billion, and not one penny of it got returned to the CBR. It was all hidden in the SBR, the savings bank account that is there, that only requires 51% of the vote of the legislative body, not 3/4 like the CBR does. as governor, you got a lot of power, and we saw what happened to our governor currently in his first year. There's going to be a lot of special interests that are going to come after you. They're going to attack you. They're going to go for the throat. They're going to try to find every misdeed that ever happened, whether it was a part of your doing or not. At-will employees that you as governor have the right to dismiss the first day that you go into office are going to file lawsuits saying you can't fire me. Where do you stand? I mean, I packed a lot into the budget area there, but it helps speeds along the interview here, and I'll make sure you don't miss any of the questions that I had.
All right. So I'm going to start at the top and start working my way back. So please remember what you said. The first thing, when people come up with threats, don't bother. I've been through IEDs. I've been through mortar attacks. I've been through direct gunfire. You don't scare me, so don't even try that. So let's go back a little bit more. You as a household, whether you're the mom or the dad, somebody in your household has to do the budget. And here a few years ago, it just so happened that at the same time, this country, back in the good old days when we were only $18 trillion in the hole, and I'm talking about the federal, and you'll see why in a moment. It just so happened at that time I was $18,000 in debt myself, but I make an okay paycheck. I'm not rich, but I'm not poor. And I started looking at that, and I said, why is it that I can't just pay these debts off? So I looked at the money that I'm making versus the money I spend, and I realized I had money left over every month. So I started cutting out the mocha in the morning, and this or that in the morning, and just the extra stuff, maybe cutting out going to the movie every now and then. And I was out of debt in just a few months. Now, here's the problem. The state, I saw this when I was in the military. The end of the year, the end of the fiscal year would come. We've been begging for ammo to go out and train. And the end of the fiscal year comes up, and we've got all this ammo that we weren't allowed to use during the year. And we did what we called a spendex. You go out to the range, you just blow off all that ammo. I see federal workers who get brand new furniture and all that stuff, and I'll bet you the same thing happens at the state level, where when they get the new furniture, the old stuff goes to a dump somewhere. We're wasting money by the millions upon millions of dollars, folks. And these are things I've seen with my own eyes. When it comes to the state, what we have to do is say, let's look at the things that the state is actually required to do. And all the other stuff, let's start cutting a few things away. And you start to cut the budget that way. And that, I believe that's the governor's job. And when the legislature starts pushing stuff, say, we need this, we have to say, do we really need that? Do we really need, for instance, I'm going to have to pick on an organization here, and there are probably good people working there, but I'm just going to say it, like the small business development outfit. I would be all for it if they were doing their job. But I went to them and I asked them, can you name me one success that has been a result of this office? And they looked at me like a deer in the headlights. They could not name one single success. Folks, you're paying for this.
We see that all over the place, and
Yes.
you brought up a good example there of it. And I'm not one that's not afraid to name off organizations. So we got Alaska AFL-CIO because I don't care about stepping on your toes. Thank you very much. So we got Alaska AFL-CIO, one of the biggest union organizations in Alaska, 60,000 people strong. We got NEA of Alaska, another big organization for education. They are sitting at around 22,000 strong in that particular little clique. Then we got places like the Rasmussen Foundation, who also had sitting as, at one point, the chair of the Senate Finance Committee and then co-chair of the Senate Finance Committee, dictating hundreds of millions and billions of dollars of our state funding, making sure a huge portion of that went into her family's business, the Rasmussen Foundation.
How about that?
We got the Alaska Municipal League, who is also another organization out there that's supposed to be helping out the municipalities of Alaska, help grow their economy and things like that. Instead, I find them being lobbyists down there in Juneau, pounding on their doors for those same big unions that I just got done naming off in non-profit organizations, or for-profit organizations, to line their pockets with more money, and doing it on the backs of Alaskans in the form of a taxation that affects every man, woman, and child. I mean, children. You guys are, those down in Juneau are taxing the children of Alaska, people that are not even old enough to work, can't even take care of themselves because they're still being pushed around in a stroller because they're that young, and they're being taxed to live in this state so that these rich elite can continue to get what they want, which is the old mighty dollar.
Right.
So expanding upon that, as you were saying, the economy, and we've got $300 million of pork spending there that's been added to $5.1 billion this next year. Where's the cuts going to come from? Where do you see that you could get the economic relief? And I say relief as in gain back control over the spending. Mm-hmm. Every mom and dad that sits at their kitchen table at night, Joe Biden, and discusses how much is going out the door. Unlike Joe Biden, the rest of us live paycheck to paycheck. So we've got to budget ahead of time to know what's going to be next month or a year from now and plan for that when the surplus is there to get back to poverty once again because it dries up.
Right. So again, this goes back to the Constitutional Convention. This is going to be when I'm elected, when I take office, we're going to be rolling into a Constitutional Convention. And I will have plenty to say, although I don't think I'll be able to vote in it. I'll be able to use my bully pulpit. But this is a chance to start fixing some of these things. For instance, our so-called education. We don't have an education system here. We have a communist indoctrination system here. And people hate me. I lost half the audience when I said that. But I'm going to tell you something, folks. I remember when I was a kid, and I started school in 1969, and we were taught how this country is supposed to work. We were taught 2 + 2 = 4, not 2 + 2 may equal 4. No, it equals 4. We have a system here that isn't about education. I had a daughter, she went to one of the local schools, and in her 8th grade math class, the teacher wouldn't teach them the formulas they had to know for algebra. This teacher tried to make them figure out how to put the formula together. That's not teaching. That's sitting on your rear end collecting a check for not doing anything. And it's time for it to stop. The teachers' unions, you can hate me, but I tell you what, I know a lot of teachers that agree with me right now. The teachers' unions have gotten way too powerful. Here's what needs to happen. You say, well, this is a radical concept, Bruce. It's time for radical concepts, folks. It's time that we get out of the old mold, because if we don't do it, we have lost at least the next 2 or 3 generations of people. And as I always say, as I get farther from Pampers and closer to Depends, I want the right people being educated and knowing what they're doing. So here's what needs to happen. Right now we're paying, I believe it's $19,000 per student.
Oh, well, no, I'll correct you on that one. This year it's $27,000 per student. Traditionally, it's closer to $22,000 per student. Some years it's dropped down as low as 20, but you have to go back a decade to get into the 20 range.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's look at this for a second. I'll take you at your word. Let's say $27,000 per student. Somebody's got to pay for that. Are you getting what you're paying for? We're at the very bottom, if not dead last, right at the last 2 or 3 in the nation.
Well, let me help you out here real quick on that, since that is one of the big 2 that I wanted to get into besides the PFD. We got Alaska Education. We got 54 districts in Alaska. Each one has their own administration, running their own organization, running their own health care. We have 3 boroughs in Alaska, which I've several conversations with different folks out there that say that reducing it down to 3 would be too small. But we watch places like Hawaii and other locations, and I throw out Hawaii out there because they're on islands that kind of gives you a more diverse. The only way to get there is travel through boat or plane. It's very similar to Alaska in that regards. And yet they run and operate on, I believe, only 3 districts there within their state. And so we have 54 here in Alaska, and I'm constantly hearing that it's 17 would be the right number. If we had 17, that would help to take care of the diversity, the equity, the unique economic positions or culture that is within each region in Alaska. But it's one of the biggest overheads that is out there. The pandemic opened our eyes to it. As for ranking in Alaska, we are, as of January of this last legislative session, when the commissioners were sitting in talking about the prior year's results, where we stood as a state and where we ranked, they said we are ranked 52.
Oh my.
In the United States, and that's including Puerto Rico and Guam. They went as far as to say that we are worse than many third world countries for the education that we're providing here in Alaska at triple the cost of the nation. And when we threw out the $27 million or $27,000 per student. That is currently for enrollment. That does not include the forward funding of $1.2 billion. If you add that in, it's closer to $40,000 a student, not the $27,000 that we're currently at right now.
Well, as far as comparing us to other nations, I talked to a lady who was, I believe, from Ghana, and she said in her country, kids sit in mud hut schools, and they have just like great grandma used to have the little slate with a piece of chalk, and that's how they learned. And those kids' education was far and away better than what we have here in Alaska. You can hate me for saying that, but you can't prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. Please do. Come out and try to prove me wrong. So my fix for this, you look at what D.C. did before Obama came along and goofed it up. They had vouchers, and the parents were given, I don't know what the voucher was, but for our sake here, let's say it's $7,000 per kid to the parent. And you take your kid to the school. Now, here in the borough, Colony is where my son Roger graduated high school, and as far as our schools go, it's not the worst. It's one of the better ones. That ain't saying much with Alaska schools the way they are. Hate me for saying it, but again, prove me wrong. Let's say you took your kid and said, I'm going to take this kid to Colony, and you give them the $7,000 for tuition for that year, and nobody's taking their kid to Podunk School down the road or Mooseville High, whatever. And guess what that other school has to do? They either have to up their game and start doing better, or they have to close their doors and admit that they failed, and all the kids go to the other school. And it's just like anything with a free market economy. It's just like water. It finds its own level, and things get fixed. And it costs, well, as you just heard this gentleman saying, that would cost you a quarter of what we're paying right now. How is that not a good idea? And what you get at the end of it is you remember back when schools used to work? You remember when Alaska schools used to be good? I'll bet you do.
I do.
And they actually taught you things. You remember those good old days? I talked to a lady in town.
If you didn't get the education that you were receiving, like let's say you were in algebra and you just didn't grasp it, those teachers didn't pass you along.
Right.
They failed you.
Yeah.
That was the school I grew up in, where now today you don't understand your algebra. Oh, we're going to give you a passing grade. It's going to be a D, but it's going to be a passing grade, or they'll call it a passing grade. No more letters in a lot of the schools anymore for our grading system.
But didn't those kids get their feelings hurt when they failed?
Oh, they no longer fail because they got a pass.
Right.
In my day, my feelings were hurt that I didn't pass, but I didn't understand it when I was in high school, and I'm one of those people, and I'll argue, yes, I received an F while I was in high school, but I went to further college education, and when I learned algebra, and I went as far as geometry and trigonometry when I was in college, but the difference between schooling from what they were trying to teach me in high school versus to what I got taught at a college level taught it to for dummies.
Yep.
Here's a book that breaks it down page by page, lesson by lesson, chapter by chapter. Where in high school, we were jumping all over the book.
Right.
Start in chapter 1, go to chapter 10 tomorrow, go to chapter 15 the week after that, go back to chapter 7, then go back to chapter 9, and now here's your final test. And you got to remember all the chapters that you went through and how they all coordinated together just to try to study for that test, which odds are, unless you were a brainiac, you never were in the top percentage of the class anymore.
Right. And here's the problem with our education in this country in general, but in Alaska, holy smoke, man, this is the perfect example of how bad you can do it. You got kids that, doggone it, we just don't want to hurt their feelings, so we're going to pass them on. And you have a kid that's failing English, and the teacher has them do a diorama of Shakespearean novels or some business like that, or his plays, and they get extra credit so they pass.
Or you show up to this protest out in front about some advocacy of some shooting of some school that happened down there, and we'll give you a grade for participating in the protest marching down to the Juneau Capitol.
Right. Now, here's the problem with that kind of thinking. While your kids are being coddled and petted and saying, oh, it's all right if you flunk, if you don't understand anything, we'll just pass you anyway, and you'll get to walk across the stage on graduation day. While that's going on, guess what's going on in China? They're knuckling down. Those kids are learning. In Japan and Korea and places like this, and I mentioned China because the communist Chinese have bought our state out, and I can prove a lot of that. A lot of you hate me for what I just said. A lot of you people in government hate my guts for what I just said, but I'm going to say it. But the bottom line is this, folks. Those people who against whom your kids will be competing in the world's economy, they're not being taught, well, 2 plus 2 may equal 4. No, they're being told 2 plus 2 absolutely equals 4, period, end of story.
That goes right into the equity, diversity, and inclusion policies that they now have in school. If any other rational adult in this world, we would call that critical race theory,
Right.
but they don't call it that there. And you're very right. You take the brightest student in the school, and you're chopping down their education to match the stupidest student in the school. Excuse my French if I offend anybody. It's not politically correct, but F you. We got an education system that's done exactly what you're describing. It's dumbed it down. 2 plus 2 is no longer 4. 2 plus 2 is as well. It feels like it should be 3, but the answer is really 4. But thank you for at least writing something down on your paper. Here's an A for effort.
Well, let's really offend some people here. When I was in school, we had what was called biology class. And Mr. Riggs, God rest his soul, my teachers from my younger days had him as their teacher, and everybody loved Mr. Riggs. And guess what he taught? He taught science. There's a shocker for you. You know, he taught things like, here's how biology works. Females can have babies. Men can't have babies. We're living in 1984, folks. We're living in an Orwellian world where you can be prosecuted for saying that men can't become pregnant. Folks, you have been lied. It's worse than being lied to. You've been swindled. Your money that that's taken out of your pocket to pay for our education is paying for indoctrination, to the tune of, like the gentleman just said, $27,000 was it per year?
$27,000 per student was this past year, and that will go down to about $23,000 a student. It's actually increased compared to what the regular norm is, and that's because they passed the Reads by 9 Act. That added more money into it, and the $50 per student base allocation increase that they permanently gave. That's part of that $300 million permanent increase that I was describing at the very beginning of this all.
And our kids, they go to college outside, because why would you go to college here? USA or Anchorage University, Alaska University in Anchorage there, almost lost their charter. So why would you send your kids to this university? So you send your kid to a university outside. I used to teach at university in Iowa. When I was in the Army, that was one of the jobs that I did. I was a ROTC instructor, but I taught college class there as well. And people, our students, and God bless them, they don't know. It's not their fault. It's our fault because we allowed it to happen.
Yeah, I mean, we had community colleges here in Alaska. I mean, growing up as a teenager and a young adolescent, colleges was, oh man, I really want to go to my community college. And for me, it was just around the corner where on Tudor Road there, just on the backside where Providence is, just like it is now. That was the community college.
Right. So we send our kids to these colleges outside. The kids arrive just having graduated, and they're full of hope and vision for what they're going to do with their life. And they go to these colleges, just any old college, and they're told, you're going to have to take remedial English and remedial math because you didn't learn anything. And again, folks, I apologize to my sons. I said, boys, I have to apologize to you because for the first time in this nation's history, I'm not giving you as good a country as was given to me. Folks, we have failed, and we'd better face it like men and women, face it like adults, and say, we've got to fix this. Now, you have a bunch of people. You got 10 different guys running for governor right now. And I will not take away from any of them. Well, maybe some. But there's a lot of honorable people out there. But I'm going to say this very plainly. I know the price that was paid for the freedom and for the education and for the ability of our kids to have a future. I know what was paid for it. The first man to die in this war was a friend of mine, Nate Chapman. I knew him. He was a friend of mine. I served with him in 2 different companies in special forces. And he died doing what he loved. My buddy Tung Nguyen died for this country. He was one of the boat people back in the 80s. Very dear friend of mine. He was one of my guys. And he died for this country in October, I believe it was, in 06. I know the price of our freedom here. And when I come home and I see what they're doing, I have got a major problem with this, folks. I've got a real problem with the indoctrination that's going on in this country, and for our state government to just keep rolling over and rolling over and rolling over. That's about to end, folks. Put me in that office and see what we do. You watch and see if I back down.
A lot of the things that you're going to have control of while you're there in Juneau, representing Alaskans as governor of our state, is the control of it. Basically, here's my proposed budget that I am going to give you to spend, and I also want to see these additional bills pushed through and passed. One of them is the right to be able to compete in men and women's sports, and where biological men compete against biological men, biological women compete against biological women, and if they want to compete as something else, that's why we have co-ed sports.
Right.
The Mat-Su Valley is the only place that I am aware of in the entire state that the school district out here has promoted and passed that biological sports does matter, and you are to compete only as your biological gender defines, not what your feelings want to say.
Right.
And this has created a big outrage throughout the state. People that were still making threats of suing have started the process of filing lawsuits against this that has been passed. Now, this law that this ordinance, or what the school board put in place, it's always kind of confusing when it comes to the school board, other than it's more of an internal law for the school district versus an ordinance that affects everywhere else, or a law that gets passed by legislators that has to be followed throughout the state. What are your feelings towards legislation of biological playing in biological sports, to simplify it? And the fun one I love to throw in there now, define what is a woman.
Okay, I know this is complicated, folks, but I do remember Mr. Riggs' class. If you're born with, I'm sorry to put this bluntly, but I'm going to. If you're born with male genitalia, you're a man, you're a male. If you're born with female genitalia, reproductive organs, you're a female. You will grow to be a woman. You can hate me. You can defy the science of that, but it's just scientific fact. But in today's, I don't care about today's world's idea of this. Science is science, all right? It's proven, and it's been proven since man was created. And I don't care if you are a creationist, as am I, or an evolutionist, you still have to understand that nothing can reproduce with its own gender. Okay, you're either a male or you're a female. Legislation to keep males out of female sports and vice versa, you better believe we will. When you have a young girl, we saw this with that swimming competition. This girl had busted her rear end to be the top of the top swimmer in her, in her class and in her particular sport in the pool. And here comes this guy taller than me. I'm 6'1". He comes sauntering out there and beats the record by, I believe they said, over a minute or something. It was a ridiculous win.
Something that no other woman in the world will be able to achieve.
Never.
Not in our lifetimes, anyways.
Not ever. Now, let's turn that around. Okay, there are things that women can do that men can't do. For instance, I'm colorblind. Not bad, but I am colorblind. Men tend to be colorblind. What if they had a competition that said we have a female color blindness test versus a men's color blindness competition, and some woman went over and said, "Hey, I'm a guy today." Well, she'd blow us all out of the water because she's not going to be colorblind like I am, because women just scientifically, I don't know why, but they tend not to be as colorblind. And it's the same thing. Okay, what if a woman got involved in men's figure skating? She's going to outskate us, because we're big clumsy oafs. We're like cows on crutches. And these little girls, they come out there and they'll outskate us hands down. Folks, it's time to stop being stupid. Okay, and I'm just going to say this plainly. That's stupidity. To sit there and say, well, if this guy feels like a girl today, and I'm going to say this again. You think about this. When your schools are teaching your boys, and when our military is teaching your sons, well, if you got up this morning feeling like a woman, then you're a woman. Guess what Xi's army's not doing? Guess what Putin's army's not doing, folks? They're teaching their kids to kill your kids. They're not teaching them all this political correct BS. They're telling them the truth. And it's time that we started saying, enough's enough. We're not going to go along with this anymore. I will.
Energy, renewable energy, Green New Deal. the new $400 billion resiliency package that the Biden administration is trying to pass. That's going to be nothing more than tax the rich, which is not really what's going to happen. Is going to be tax the poor and the middle class, while the rich jack up their prices even more to cover the new increase in taxes that they're now receiving, so that their income doesn't drop, that they take home in the end. The ultimate price is always paid by us, the little guys out there that are living hand to mouth, living in either poverty or in just above the poverty limit, to where we don't qualify, which is where I sit at, for any of the special benefits out there that are given to, right now, 33% of Alaskans. Pre-pandemic, we had a little bit less than 20% of Alaskans living on welfare of one form or another. Since the pandemic happened, we are now sitting with roughly 33% of Alaskans now living off of welfare in one form or another. And that could include just as simple as getting free Medicare or medical health care as a welfare benefit. We see several different good examples of what they don't call welfare, but I do believe is, like our ferry system is one of those. We've got a subsidized transportation system out there that nowhere else in Alaska does that occur, and they get rates that only people in Barrow or Yukatovik only dream of being able to get, instead of having to pay that $800 or $2,800 to fly in their goods for food, perishables and whatnot. They could have had it done easily for around $500 on a ferry system if there was one going there, because the state of Alaska is paying for the rest of those transportation costs. I can go to Valdez with my vehicle and trailer for about $1,500, which is equivalent to me buying two round-trip tickets for me and my kiddo to go down to Valdez at the exact same time. And that was a round trip for my vehicle and my trailer at that price. And it cost us just as much to take a plane ticket and 2 pieces of luggage versus here's a truck, a trailer fully loaded, heading down the same direction and coming back.
Okay, so it's gonna. There's a lot to unpack there, and everything you just mentioned, well, I could stand up and preach about. So we'll talk about the road system in just a second, and please don't let me forget that. I want to address that specifically. But let's go back to these groovy renewable energy and all that. You know, that stuff's grand on a small scale. Like, I would love to have my own piece of property and have solar and all that. Dixie Lee Ray is a lady. You used to hear Rush Limbaugh talk to her. She used to be the governor of Washington. And she talked about the good old days, because she was a very old lady when she died, I believe in the late 90s. She said they weren't all that good. I was there. She said if you wanted to run, say, the city of New York on solar panels, you'd have to have a solar array the size of New York City to run the city. That's not economically feasible, folks. That's just stupid. So let's talk about your car. There's a place in France, I saw this, and they have these little goofy-looking cars, smaller than your couch there. Electric cars. And I'm just cheap enough that if I had a car that would recharge itself, I'd probably buy that just because I'm a cheapskate. But the bottom line is, when that battery goes out, it costs more to replace the battery than to just throw away the car and get a new car. So the whole car goes to the junkyard. Now, electric cars haven't been, I mean, they've had them since they've had cars. I remember Jay Leno driving an old electric car from 100 years ago. They are not energy efficient. Well,
I always like to go back to the old Teslas that they used to show, and we're talking about going back to Tesla, the scientist, not Tesla that we have current.
Right. So those cars that they have nowadays with the batteries, that battery degenerates by about 2 to 3% per year. So by the time you get this car that can, say, run 300 miles on a charge, within 10 years it can only go 200 miles. Okay, and here's the problem: when that car dies, and you've got to charge that battery, you have to have the electricity coming from something, folks. And guess what? You see this wall right here? It's not got electricity crammed in there that when you plug something in, it just leaks out. That's got to come from something. Typically, it comes from a coal or gas generating plant or a hydro. But this business where you can power the world with windmills, we're already seeing landfills filled with that junk. Okay? Now, but let's say that it did work. Let's say that it worked just fine. Did you know that lithium batteries leak a very deadly gas? I had a friend who is gone now. He died a few years ago. But when he was in the Q course, and those of you who know who I am, the Q course, what we call the Special Forces Qualification Course. Well, this guy was a commo guy in 18 Echo. He had a friend that woke up dead one morning because he slept with his lithium batteries inside his sleeping bag, and it gave off a gas that killed him. This is true. Now, let's go back a little bit further. That lithium and that cobalt and all these things have to be dug out of mines in places like Africa and China. And guess who is out there doing the digging? Little children digging with their little hands.
Yeah, I've
They're
watched the
slaves.
pictures
And I've
of
got a
and
problem
seen the
with slavery.
videos of them crawling around in these pools of water, which is basically just nothing more than poison. That their life expectancy is less than the age of 20. Just because of the toxic chemicals that they are sludging around in all day long, mining these materials that these Green New Deal people say is such a wonderful deal. They don't care where it comes from, how it's being mined, how it's being produced, only that it's cutting the carbon emissions down. It's going to save people's lives, but they don't care about the lives that it's destroying,
Right.
getting them that materials. Where here in Alaska, and I'm bringing this back into Alaska picture here. We have these minerals. We are known for the best practices in the world for our mining and our oil and any mineral extraction, whether it be fish or timber added on top of that, than anywhere else in the world. We are the model of the world.
Yep.
I asked you a question earlier, are you a lawmaker or are you a lawbreaker? And let me get out this question, and it is packed here, and I'll tell you what. But we have laws that says back in 1959, when we became the state of Alaska, the 49th state of the United States of America, our Constitution says that we Alaskans are to utilize our mineral resources for our economic prosperity so that we are not sitting with our hands out on a daily basis begging the federal government for our survival.
Right.
Since 1980, about midway through, right towards the 1990s, that all changed. Environmentalists, those greenies that say the world's going to be over in 10 years, Al Gore coming out and saying the polar bears will no longer exist, where there's 30,000 more now than there was the day that he made that announcement that they were going to be wiped off the planet Earth. All these things came into play and stopped our development here in the state of Alaska. We got things like Ambler Mine that's waiting on just a road to become one of the most productive mines that we have here in Alaska. We have Pebble Mine, which the own ESI or EIS report that came out, that's done by our government for engineers for our environment, has come out and said there is less than a 1% chance. We're talking like a 0.001% chance of even the worst biblical economical disaster that ever happened. Moses proportions, building the ark again, floods, tornadoes, earthquakes of the worst we've ever seen make 1964 seem like child's play here in Alaska would have to occur before those tailing ponds that they're so fearful of would even reach the water table or the Bristol Bay area to affect any fish, which, by the way, less than 0.1% of the fish comes out of the watershed that this mine is going to be developed into the Bristol Bay.
Right. So the problem with all of this is if Pebble Mine could prove beyond the shadow of it, and I think they come pretty close, frankly, as do like Usabelli and all these other companies come and do a really bang-up job, and they leave the place as clean as they found it, if not better in some cases. If they prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that there's absolutely 100% no way in the world there could ever be any contamination of any kind, these people would still be crying, because this isn't about that. What this is about is killing industry in the United States in general and in Alaska in particular. There's a gentleman behind all this. I believe his name is Xi Jinping. You see, because the Chinese, they want to destroy our economy. Of course they do. Because if they destroy ours, they have no competition after that. And these people have been manipulated by the communists all the way going back to the 50s. Well, probably before that. I can given time, I can prove that it goes back to right after the Bolshevik Revolution. They have been destroying the American economy, and they do this by trying to shame people and make people feel good about themselves in trying to save everything. But in saving everything, they really are destroying everything. As you said, Al Gore, he came out, well, about the year 2013, there will be no ice in Alaska. And we've got, the glaciers haven't receded. The ice cap is just where it was. And say, well, it has receded. Yeah, it does that every year, folks. It's called summer. All right. Now, going back to the Pebble Mine, or I'm sorry, the promises made at statehood, as you said, there were promises made because we had to show that we could sustain ourselves, and we said we can do it with our mineral wealth. Governor Hickel, when he was governor, and before that, he was saying this, said, we will never be politically powerful enough to do the things that need to be done. So adjudicate, adjudicate, adjudicate. So what we do is we begin to develop the stuff and say, hey, you can't stop us because this was promised at statehood. Remember what I said a while ago, a promise made must be a promise kept. When the U.S. government promised us we could develop our stuff because we're now a state just like any other state, then we're just going to go ahead and do those things. And if they don't like it, then we will take it to the Supreme Court. We have got to be able to develop our mineral wealth just like anybody else.
Well, we got things like the Sturgis case, which was our waterway rights, being able to travel across our waters that even when they consider it federal, it's Alaska's the waters, not federal government don't own the waters. And the Sturgis case had to go all the way up to the Supreme Court and fought feverishly trying to get that to where us Alaskans had our rights to our waterways. Same thing with our mineral rights, but as you're stating here, and as with the Sturgis case, it didn't happen overnight. It was a decades-long battle to get that pushed through. We don't have decades left.
Right.
We are years away from economical ruination, which is why they keep going after the permanent fund dividend. And there is no economical future within our own state. Lawmakers, lawbreakers. We've got our Constitution, which is the supreme law of Alaska, second only to the Constitution of the United States of America. We have lawbreakers, Joe Biden and his administration, that has passed executive orders that shut down all drilling in Alaska, all subsurface rights that are on federal lands like Anwar and down in the Bristol Bay area and stuff like that, making sure our Gulf Coast is no longer able to develop up the resources that we have down there, doing every step of the way trying to shut down what is already in operation. Nord Stream 2 was handed over to Russia and said, here you go, we're going to open you back up. He's now gone begging to Saudi Arabia and Venezuela, the terrorist countries of the world, the socialist dictators that have anarchy and destruction and ruination within their countries, death to all Americans. And Joe Biden's on an apology tour, kissing their rings, begging them to please give us more, while they laugh at him and tell them, no, we're not going to do that, showing once again to the world how weak we really are. Why are we listening to our federal government anymore? I mean, seriously, why are we listening to our federal government? Why, as we as a state, not uphold our own state constitution and start developing up our resources? And when you said it here, you kind of touched upon it there for a second. Why are we not just starting to develop it up? And when they go, shame on you, you shouldn't do that, you just point to our Alaska Constitution and say, hey, here's our Constitution. We're following what our Constitution says. Unless you pass something on a federal level that says our Constitution is null and void, we're going to do what our Constitution says. And to bring this a full tie, we have laws out there that we currently don't follow, like the marijuana law is on a federal level. It is illegal federally throughout the entire United States to sell marijuana, yet here we are in Alaska doing just that. We got the ex-mayor Berkowitz, who turned Anchorage into a sanctuary city to where any illegal immigrant that is ever caught within the Anchorage municipality will never be processed for illegal immigration unless ICE brings a direct order specifying that person by name, which rarely ever happens here in the state of Alaska. And then we've got throughout the entire United States the biggest illegal immigration process that is going on top of the marijuana laws, on top of other laws that have been passed that go completely 100% against our federal government laws that we have. if we're a nation of laws, we're supposed to be lawmakers and not lawbreakers. If we are so willingly to break all of these other laws, why are we not so willing to break the laws for the development of our resources, which we do better than anywhere in the world, and just start doing it?
Okay, so I was taking notes for the folks that are, you might have thought I was ignoring the gentleman here. That's not what's happening. I'm taking notes so that I can not forget what he talked about. The closest we've come, I think, in recent past anyway, was when the EPA came in and tried to shut down the chicken mine up there, and Sean Parnell said, "I don't recognize your authority, and if you don't leave, I'm going to have the troopers put cuffs on you and arrest you." And they left. That's the first thing that we need to do, is we need to explain to these people, I don't see your organization in the US Constitution. I sure don't see it in the Alaska Constitution. Therefore, I don't see you as having any real authority here. And again, going back to what I talked about earlier, if we had sheriffs up here, the sheriff, if I'm governor, the sheriff doesn't answer to me. He doesn't answer to the mayor. He doesn't answer to the borough mayor. He answers to you and to the US Constitution. That's their job. And they go out there and say, I don't recognize your authority. I'm giving you such and such amount of time to get out of my state, or I will put you in jail. That's one thing. Okay, now why do we knuckle under to this? All these different things. We have government here that sees Alaska government as subordinate to the U.S. government, and it is not. They're parallel. They're at different levels, but they parallel one another. I am, as governor, I will not be subordinate to Joe Biden. I'm the executive of the state of Alaska. He is the executive, sort of the U.S., unlawfully so, I believe, but be that as it may. You stand up for your state, period. That's the way it works in this country. Now, we fought over that. The Civil War was over states' rights. The problem was the states' right that was the big thing there was slavery, and no, that's not okay. No, and I could go back to stuff we were talking about earlier and talk about my position on slavery throughout the world. Oil in Alaska, gas in Alaska, you mentioned those. Here's the thing, folks. They want to liquefy natural gas. They want to send it all the way to Nikiski. The people in Nikiski don't want it there. The way you liquefy natural gas is you bring the temperature way down. Why would you not do that on the North Slope? And if you do that on the North Slope, you send that stuff around during the ice-free months down to the Aleutians, and you put it in holding farms there, or you send it over the other way to Germany, where they're no longer getting gas from the Russians, and you send it there by tankers after you have liquefied it, and you sell it to them for a substantial profit.
Another good example there is we need more icebreakers, because our North Slope across the Arctic up there, they could completely go on the Arctic Circle, and just like Russia is doing, they got what, some 40 plus icebreakers now. And we have one. China has 17. They're on the equator. And they have 17 icebreakers, and we have one in operation and a second one that is supposedly going to be ready here at the end of 2022, 2023, somewhere in there. It's supposed to be out there, but two.
Right. So
what
if, and I've thought about this, and I agree that Coast Guard needs to have more, and I've been talking to some of those folks. We've got to support it. We need a small Navy as a Coast Guard up here, because we have more coastline than everybody else in the U.S., but I wonder what would happen if some really smart company said, you know what if we had commercial icebreakers that contracted to the shipping companies to break ice for them? Wouldn't that be cool? I don't know why somebody hasn't done that before now, but going back to the natural gas, the side effect, or rather the byproduct of the liquefaction process, is helium. Helium's very expensive nowadays. We can live without helium, but there is a worldwide helium shortage. Now, talk about the marijuana thing. I know when the people were pushing for the legalization of marijuana, what they said is, we're going to make industrial hemp. This is going to be the industrial hemp capital of the world, blah, blah, blah. Then the thing passed, and I just see a bunch of people stoned. I don't see that. There is some industrial hemp stuff being developed into products like hempcrete and so forth. But let's face it, folks, it's just about getting high.
Most of them out there are about 1% of them are what you're describing, the industrial side of marijuana.
Yeah, so
and then the other 9 are all marijuana farms and distribution points, like the coffee stands on the side of the road.
Yeah, and when you take the Matsu, which used to be the breadbasket of the state of Alaska, now it's the pot stash of the state of Alaska, folks, we've got a problem. And as was pointed out by Laura Ingram, now I've never been stoned except when I was in the hospital and I got a heart operation. They put me on some kind of groovy stuff that put me right out. And I've never even been drunk. And if that's your bag, you knock yourself out. If you stay at home and you smoke your weed, I'm not going to come after you. You've had that right. That right was secured by the Raven decision, I think, in '74. But when they legalized this stuff, look what happened to our state. You can hate me for saying this, but you can't prove me wrong. When I go down here in downtown Palmer and I see a guy stoned off his gourd and he's sitting with his feet in the street, sitting on the curb rolling a joint, we've got a problem, folks. Now, people say marijuana is not a gateway drug. Well, that may be true. And I've known some people that smoked dope and they did their job and they were fine. And I've heard of people getting off of hard drugs by switching to pot. But Laura Ingram pointed this out. She said, everybody that you see that is hooked on heroin and all the rest of it, they all started with pot. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you can't smoke your pot, and I don't think I have that authority. But I can tell you, I can show you a better way. We talked about a whole lot of things there. I'm trying to make sure we don't miss anything, but we...
Well, basically, for me, the main question here that we're tackling with is why are we listening to the federal government when it comes time for developing up our resources here in the state of Alaska? Right. And as governor, you're going to have a big say over our legislative body because you dictate the policies that you want for our state of Alaska.
Right.
Governor Dunleavy came out and he fought for our resources until the swamp got their claws into him and shut his agenda down that very first year and basically made him go and hide in the closet, for lack of a better description. We saw Governor Walker sell out 75% of Alaska's LNG to a deal to China to make an LNG pipeline from the North Slope down to Nikiski, which, as you were just describing, with a good deep water port in St. Nome, we could just have a really short pipeline developed and be sending all of that stuff out by tanker on a daily basis, constantly flowing, never ending, and with a couple of icebreakers going across the Arctic slope.
Right. So,
if the governor, do you support, and I love to use a more crude sense of the word, flipping the bird to our federal government and just start developing up our resources and saying, what are you going to do? Get rid of us strategically? Are you going to disown us and say you're no longer a part of the United States, knowing that we can see Russia from many places out the doorstep of their front doors here in Alaska?
You know, people can think what they want about Governor Hickel, but the one thing he did not hesitate to do is just tell the federal government, no, we're going to do this our way. We're going to be about big projects. We're going to do Alaska things. If you don't like it, we don't really care. And, you know, we don't want to get to the point where we're so independent that we don't consider ourselves part of this country. But the bottom line is the country, and when I say that, I'm talking about the federal government, looks at Alaska as a colony. They don't look at us as another state. I'll bet you that Joe Biden doesn't look at Delaware and Alaska as being on the same level playing field. I can bet you that. But we're going to have to get back to that, folks. Now, as far as the shipping of the natural resources, for instance, gas, the town that I grew up in Indiana, unfortunately, and as soon as I was 18, I headed to Alaska. I've never looked back. But that town was founded on an ocean of natural gas, and some of you heard this story before, so skip ahead. But they discovered it there in the 1880s, and it didn't run out until about 15 years ago. And every bit of natural gas that left Howard County, some was piped right there within the county, but stuff that went to other places, it left on a rail car after it was liquefied. We could do the same thing here, but it would take extending the rail to Prudhoe Bay, which would cost $1 billion, versus a pipeline that would cost many billions of dollars. When they built the oil pipeline, the industry paid for that. Doesn't it make sense for them to pay to get that rail extended? Okay, so you get it up there, and maybe you extend it on to Utqiagvik. So even after the oil and the gas and everything's gone in centuries from now, the people still have a rail system to get in and out. So you've got a pipeline that basically paid for itself even without the oil and the gas. As far as the road systems, I've talked about this in other venues. I used to be a combat engineer, and we use this stuff called EnviroGrid for making roads and runways and stuff. This stuff winds up costing you about $250,000 a mile. What if they extended a road like that from, say, Prudhoe Bay and all the way around to the native hubs and back up to Anchorage, so that you could have very cheap shipping of goods and services without using planes and all that stuff? Now, there are villages that wouldn't want that in their village, and I say, okay, more power to you. But this would get the goods and the services in there. You go up to places like Bear or Utqiagvik, and they're paying $15 a gallon for a gallon of milk. We got some problems, folks, and they're problems we can fix, and do it economically. I know how to do it. I've done it with these two little grubby paws of mine. I've done those things.
All right, I'm going to bring in the last giant monkey in the room,
All right.
and this will be the final question because we've gone a little over an hour here, and I know you've got events that you are to be at this afternoon.
Be there at 2 o'clock. We're doing a march from Palmer going up the Palmer Wasilla. Come out and join us.
And where in Palmer would they go to start this?
It'll be at the Fred Myers parking lot in Palmer.
And where's it ending?
Well, in the same place. We're going to go up the highway and we'll turn around and come back. That way there's not a logistical problem. You leave your car there, it'll be there when you come back, I hope.
Okay, just want to make sure anybody that wants to participate, and that's at 2 o'clock this afternoon?
2 o'clock this afternoon.
All right. The last big monkey in the room, and it's always part of the big three. PFD is the first one, education is the second one, and then we've got healthcare, and I'm going to add something in before we do the healthcare, just slightly here, is we've got an employment problem in Alaska, which is a part of the 33% living off of welfare of one form or another. We see from like NEA of Alaska right now, or the education of Alaska, the system out there, the 54 districts are screaming, hollering at the top of their lungs, desperate to find teachers this year. And teachers isn't so much the big holler that we're actually seeing out there. It's trying to get bus drivers, custodians to work. Anchorage is 75 bus drivers short of being able to run their routes this year, and are going to be forced to doing in-home learning again just because they can't find people to go to work. Where is this money supposed to be coming from? And the reason that, and I'm tying this in with healthcare is if we can't get people to go and work these jobs, these high-paying jobs, and being a bus driver is not a job that you're starting out at the same wage you would at McDonald's. You are paying a good price to be a bus driver here in Alaska. People don't want to go to work.
Right.
They're more happier right now to be collecting that welfare, sitting at home, because they're making more money to not work than they would if they actually went to work.
Right.
Healthcare pre-pandemic was $3.6 billion here in Alaska. And I'll repeat that, $3.6 billion. Pandemic levels have, and all the money that has flooded into our state, into the coffers of, say, Providence Hospital, Alaska Regional Hospital, Alaska Native Hospital, all of these organizations have received an additional $4 to $8 billion combined from our federal government through pass-throughs, and our local state government that has, for the relief that was given directly to them to fight this pandemic. They have all reported record-breaking profits this past 2 years. I mean, record-breaking, never before charted profits ever seen before. We're already triple the cost in the nation for our health care than anywhere else in the United States. What I would go for a normal doctor's visit, say down in California, that would cost me $100. Here in Alaska is $300 for that same visit, just to go visit the doctor. A blood panel that would cost me maybe $20 to $50. Here it would cost, down there in California, is costing me $100 just for those same blood tests that I have to take personally every single year. Instead of having a $150 bill, I see a $400 bill here in Alaska. What goals, if you're a governor, would you set to try to rein in the exorbitant cost of health care and bring that $3.6 billion down to a more manageable level, down to, say, the $2 billion mark or $1.5 billion? I mean, most of our Alaska Natives, 25% of Alaska is Alaska Natives or American Indian, which my own child is. And the healthcare system is paid for 100%. There is not one dime. It's all paid for by our federal government. It comes from local money. Yet, if you go and look at these folks, they're not utilizing their federally provided benefits of healthcare. They're using our Medicaid. And that money is costing us locally here as a state billions of dollars every single year to cater to those 25% that has 100% federally funded health care.
Right.
So what, if as governor, would you do to try to rein in that outrageously exorbitant, we're going to reap the rewards of stealing from Alaskans from their pocketbooks because we can mentality?
Okay, so I've talked to a lot of people in the healthcare industry who agree with everything that you just said. And there are people that will tell you, man, I'm going to say this and let the chips fall where they may. Here's a for instance for you. We have people who do in-home care. And I used to know somebody, I'm not going to go into it, who used to do in-home care for these three individuals. And in no time at all, she realized there was nothing wrong with these guys. And she was told, if you say that out loud, that's a HIPAA violation. You're going to get in trouble for that. Okay, there's one of our major problems. Give us just a second, folks.
Oh, no, you're
okay,
fine.
We're good. I thought we were having a technical difficulty there.
No, just turning that darn ringer off in case somebody tries to text again.
Oh, right. Okay, well, that's a cool little deal. Folks, I wish you could see this guy's setup. But the problem is, that's one of the many problems we have. We have a whole lot of people that are they're being taken care of by in-home caregivers, and that there is nothing wrong with these folks. Now, there are a lot of them that do need it. I understand that. I have a brother who's such a person. He's not here. He's in Indiana, and he has to have constant looking after. He's in very bad shape. If you pray for Jerry. We have other issues that have to be looked into, but I believe in bringing in people, not people in the legislature who are just going to lie to you and they're going to do what their lobbyists tell them to tell you. I want to bring in people who are actual experts that actually are concerned about the overpayment that is happening in this state. And we're going to find a formula. I'll admit that I can't just spit out a fix for you, but we're going to find the people who are the actual experts, and we're going to find the answer. But I can tell you this, that we're paying way more than we should because you have freeloaders freeloading on the system. That's one of the problems. Now, you talked about the unemployment issues here. Folks, it's been 2 years. They started this pandemic business, 2-3 years ago. I had COVID. I didn't even know I had it for a few days. And I know people do die from it. But guess what? People are dying from their cure just as much. Or quite a few of them are. I have 6 friends right here in Alaska who died from COVID. And 2 of them begging for ivermectin. They wouldn't give it to them. They let them die. And one of them, the hospital literally lied and said they tried to give it to her and she said no. That was a lie. You doctors and you nurses that said that, you know who you are and we know who you are. You lied to us and you let them die. I have a friend, his name is Bill. He's actually a friend of our current governor, laying in the hospital, dying. And he's gone now.
Bill Topol.
That's the guy.
Yep.
I wouldn't go say, but he did. Mr. Governor, where were you? This is a friend of yours. This was a supporter of yours. How do you face yourself in the mirror, sir? Now, going back to the unemployment situation, I was at leaving the post office in Palmer. And there's a gentleman standing there with a sign that said, anything will help. And I stopped and said, sir, are you looking for work? And he says, well, if it's the right kind of work. And I said, oh, okay. I said, well, every window here in town has a sign that says help wanted. Yeah, and he started in with his, I can't do that, like the old, I'm too weak for heavy work and too heavy for weak work or whatever. And I said, so basically what you want is for me to go out here and slave and give you my money. And I had a few other words for him I won't go into. But the bottom line, folks, we have jobs out there and we have people that are just too lazy and no account to do it. So I'll ask you, and if I offered you a $4,000 a month job, but I said, you can either have that or I'll give you $3,000 to just sit at home and not do anything. Probably you're going to, if you have no self-respect, you're going to take option number 2.
Well, yeah, there's no question asked. I mean, if just for me to do the math, which is going to be more beneficial to me, work for an extra $1,000 that I'll probably spend in gasoline getting to and from that job, or sit at home and do whatever the hell I want and get paid $3,000. I'd rather get paid $3,000 than work any day of the week.
Now, when we look at our road system and all the other things that some of it should be paid for by the federal government, not all of them, because we got borough roads, we got city roads and so forth, but you've got federal highways here. You have them here. I mean, it don't say interstate on it, but they're still paid for by the feds. And we make our roads out of crackers. Frankly, they fall apart, and they're built that way so they can keep on resurfacing. And we just can't find the money to do any of this. But Joe Biden found $10 billion to give to Alaska to try to convince you to get a vaccine that you didn't want. Don't tell me the money's not out there. They've stolen it from us. Folks, we can do better than we've been doing, and you deserve better. Way better.
So currently we've got folks that are watching from North Pole, Palmer area, Anchorage. I saw a couple pop on that were in from the Eagle River area. If you're just joining us, thank you for liking and sharing this video. It has been greatly appreciated. If you haven't liked the video or shared it by this point in time, I always have to ask the million-dollar question, why haven't you? Come on now. We're supposed to be educating Alaskans about who is running for governor or running for a House or state legislative seat, or who's running for US Congress or US Senate seats here in Alaska. We have assemblies that are currently out there running right at this moment in time that are trying and hoping that you will listen to something they have to say. But our mainstream media is failing us, and that's why I'm here today with Bruce Walden and interviewing him for governor of Alaska. I'm hoping that all of you guys were satisfied with the questions that I asked here today. Time has run out, and so I'm kind of wrapping this up here real quick. And before I give Bruce Walden the final word, before I give my final spew of the night, and we need to start stepping up. The primary elections that we're currently in is some of the worst voting records that we have in our state. The fewest amount of eligible voting Alaskans show up at the actual polls. And we were more disenfranchised this election season than any time in history, with that forced mail-in only special election primary for the US Congressional seat, the empty one that's being filled for the passing of Congressman Don Young. And we had a 10%, almost a 20%, depending on who you listen to, but I'm guarantee it's 10% rejection rate of the ballots that were turned in that election. And our normal here in Alaska is 2% rejected ballots. And to have 10% of those ballots rejected during that special election there really goes to show why we need election reform here in our state. And I want to, and I'm kind of tying this all together as a parting ending question for you, Bruce, is we've got election issues here in Alaska. We've got the Mat-Su district here on the 17th of this month going to be having a special borough meeting of making it so that our election process is going to be a hand count only happening, and it's not going to be done by a computerized machine, and that's what we're going to have to trust spits out the correct number at the end of it. And I'm really hoping that it passes here in the Valley, because maybe by our example here, we can get the rest of the state on board to give accountability. Right. Now, we've got Senator Mike Shower, who is working on SB 39, which was the election reform bill going through the Senate, and the House had its own companion bill going through, but I'm not going to mention that bill number because that was the partisan radical left agenda bill that was being pushed through that would expand voter rights, as in for illegal type voter rights, which is one of the reasons why I never supported their version of the bill. But inside of Shower's reform bill that he had there was a way to adjudicate those ballots that had something wrong with them, like it was missing a signature, or they forgot to put down a verification of like a driver's license number or their social security number, something that helped verify the person voting on that mail-in ballot only was an actual person voting for it, and not just some person collecting ballots out there and doing that like the movie 2000 Mules that we've all have seen. Hopefully you've seen that movie. And where they were just collecting ballots and dropping them off at the box to be counted. So in Alaska election reform, where do you stand on with that? And that kind of goes also within the Constitutional Convention. You can almost tie that in as a reason to vote for it. Right. Where do you stand on election reform and trying to do something to help give more accountability in this upcoming election or future elections? And you're a lieutenant governor that you're going to have running for you. Where do you think the stand right now when it comes to following and doing the job. I mean, I've seen what Kevin Meyer has done, Lieutenant Governor Kevin Meyer has done over the last few years, and he's been a huge disappointment, a complete disgrace when it comes to our election reforms. Duck and hide and blackout reports that we were supposed to be able to have to the public, and black out all the relevant information so that we can't actually see how corrupt or not corrupt our last election was here in Alaska.
So Kevin Meyer, bless your heart, you have failed us big time. As far as I'm concerned, if I had time, I would push to try to convince you to just resign, because you have two jobs: protect the state seal, run the elections. I hope you're protecting that seal, buddy, because you sure have failed in the other regard. This business, when the ballot measure 2 passed last year, you know that was a steal. You know it. You know it was a steal. Mike Lindell was up here and he said that there was 29,000 votes that were fraudulently cast here in Alaska. He can prove what he said. Nothing was done. We're going to fix that. This ballot measure 2 was made so they can steal elections. Folks, don't let them fool you. The Dominion software, which I have heard people who claim conservatism that say, no, it isn't that easy. Yes, it's just that easy. A hand recount is very doable here. It worked in this country for a couple of centuries before we started even using those old punch card computer voting systems like we used when I first voted in 1980. And it worked every single time. And by the way, back in those days, every vote was delivered by foot or on horseback for about the first 50 years until they started using telegraphs. So don't tell me it can't be done. If you go to my website, you'll see my idea of how to do the vote count and the whole thing. You can vote. You can absolutely zero chance of a single vote getting miscast. Look at my website, Walden-Lange, L-N-G-E, 2022.com. That's Walden-Lange, L-A-N-G-E, 2022.com, and look through what we see there, and we go into it in quite a bit of detail. That hand count that was made, the system that we have now, the mail-in ballots. I heard that my name, there's somebody reported they'd gotten their mail-in ballot, and my name wasn't on the ballot, although I was certified, the first certified Republican in this gubernatorial race. That's a steal, people. The people are doing it. They see it. They do it on purpose. Don't tell me after 63 years we haven't figured out how to do this. It is an upright steal. Nothing. It's straight up steal.
It's just like walking into the polling stations and seeing felt pins sitting there, knowing full well they cause bleed-throughs and misreads on the computerized systems that are reading these ballots as they're being passed through. And this year we've got the congressional special race that's going to be on the backside, I believe, of the same ballot that we're going to have our primary race on. And totally mixed signals going on here. You know, when it comes to the primary, it's pick one. And you only pick one person for the primary for the general election that's in November. And the primary here in August 16, you only are supposed to pick one person out of the list that you're giving for each district or each race that is running. And then you flip over your ballot and now you have ranked choice voting. And on the backside of that, that's going to have Sarah Palin and then Nick Begich and Mary Sweeney, I think it is. Or I may have the wrong person. I don't pay attention to the third one just because I do not politically or personally will ever align that direction when it comes to my voting. But you've got to rank them. And let's just pretend for one moment, just slightly, that Al Gross didn't drop out and there were 4 people to rank on this upcoming election. I'm understanding that we'll pretend 100 people vote on this election cycle, and those 100 people that vote, 30 of those people did not pick the top 2 ranked. In other words, they picked the number 3 and the number 4 candidates that were dropped off, and they never ranked the top 2. We're supposed to have 51% plus 1 on the ballot to win an election. And I have just been informed by the powers that be that those 100 people that voted, the 30 that did not pick the top 2 to begin with, their votes no longer count, period. And they're only going to look at the 70 votes, and they're going to give 51% of those, as long as there's 51% of those that voted for the top winner, That's now the 51%, not the 100 people. There's going to be no runoffs. The goalposts move from 51% at 100% of the voters to 51% of only 70% of the voters. The other 30% get disenfranchised, and that's what we're facing in this up and coming election.
It's an abomination, folks. This is made for the steal. That's all.
All right, well, I'd like to thank you here. This is Bruce Walden running for Alaska, Governor of Alaska, and I wish you the best of luck in this upcoming election. Final question, and it's not really a question, it's more for the people that are watching on the screen right now. If they want to get a hold of you, how would they do that? Where's their websites they can go to, social media channels, say as in Facebook pages or YouTube or anything like that? And is there a phone number that they could call to be able to contact you if they want to reach on out and get to know, talk to you more on one about the issues?
Yeah, you can call me at 907-315-1028. It's better if you text me because a lot of times I don't hear my phone ring, but I'm constantly checking my texts. If you go to the website, you'll see our Outlook email. I'm finding that Outlook isn't that dependable because I've had a few of them. I'd go to look at the person's email, I'd open it, see it one time, and before I get a chance to answer it, like I said, okay, I'll answer this in a minute. When I go back to look for it, it's gone. So if all else fails, go to my personal page, Bruce Walden 1962. Bet you can't guess why. Bruce Walden 1962 at yahoo.com. If you don't reach me at Outlook, reach me there. I was asked to do a survey. It had to do with the abortion and my stance on abortion. And if you're out there and you sent this to me, I never received it. I've looked in both of my emails. I cannot see it in there. I'm not trying to avoid you. I'll talk about that subject all day long, but I just haven't received it. So please resend that to my personal email, Bruce Walden 1962 at yahoo.com, and I guarantee I'll see it there.
Well, thank you so much. I do appreciate your time here today. And I'm just playing around with my screen there when I should be doing other things, and I should know better than that. And I do appreciate your time here today with me and being able to join us here on the show and being able to talk to other Alaskans. If you haven't liked and shared this video, please like and share this video. It is time to do that if you haven't done it already. Also, help us grow. It would be greatly appreciated if you go to our website at Politadick.com and click that support button. All proceeds go right back into doing what we're doing here right now. It covers the cost of the restream services that you can find this video currently on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and also on our website, Politadick.com. As we are live, it will always be there. Don't hesitate to like and share these videos. That's how we keep Alaskans informed, and we make sure that everybody is very well educated in our upcoming election season. And unlike this past year, this year I have the time. My health has finally gotten well enough to where I can start doing this full time again like I was. And you will be seeing me live streaming all of the gavel-to-gavels that are important to all Alaskans to be paying attention to. On top of the November election, which is just around the corner. I mean, we're not even done with primaries, and here I am talking about the November election. But just like you're seeing right now, I will be doing candidate interviews on a nearly daily basis once the primary results are done with, and trying to get these candidates on the records for all the different seats, whether it be for national US Congress or Senate, or it be more on the local level for our senators and House members in Juneau, or on an even more personal level, your local neighborhood assembly, council members, and school board members that will all be running in upcoming elections in this primary season and main electrical season year, which is just around the corner. I mean, it's coming faster than you can blink. If you haven't gone out and voted, early voting has already started. There are many precincts around Alaska that you can go and vote at. Look it up, go to alaska.gov and click on elections, and you can find out all the current information for the primaries, voting districts, election areas. You can find out how your district has changed and what numbers you now represent or letters you represent for the Senate, numbers for the House, and get to know who your candidates are up front and be ready to have an election season. And I'm throwing out to you Democrats out there, what is your problem? I would love to do interviews with you. I'd love to sit down and ask you the hard questions. I know you watch my page because you guys comment behind my back all the time in your blogs. And when you keep labeling Politadick the radical right, which I am not, I am just a conservative that has conservative values, and I want what's best for all Alaskans, not just the special interest. And I would love to be able to sit down and get to talk to you, including you rhinos, I mean Republicans out there like Representative Kelly Merrick and Louise Stutz and such and whatnot. I would love to sit down with you and do a one-on-one interview. Please, I'm throwing the challenge out to you. Get out there, get on the phone. My phone number is listed on the top of this post right now. Pick up the telephone and give me a call, and I'm more than happy to set up an interview with you and make that happen one way or another. Alaskans need to be hearing a more diverse views that are going on, not just what the mainstream media, and you're paid for it. I mean that literally. You're paid for public opinion, that the narrative that mainstream media is pushing for you instead of the facts versus the fiction. We're here for the facts. We're here for exposing what your true feelings are and where you stand. Just like we had here today with Bruce Walden for running for governor. I really do appreciate his time here today and making that happen, and I look forward to being able to have another interview with him after the primaries and get to the nitty-gritty of the real goals that are going to be coming when in the November election, if he becomes our next governor. Where does he stand on the issues? And we broke down a lot of them today, just the ones that will help you make a more informed voice and vote when you go to ballot on August 16th, or you're early voting right now. Like and share this video. Go to our website, politadick.com. Click that support button. All proceeds go right back into paying for the website, the restream services that you're watching this right now. And like and share this video, because it's Alaskans like you that help defeat the mainstream media and their censorship of our conservative platforms here in Alaska. You guys all have yourselves a wonderful and great afternoon. And do not forget to like and share.